Joining me now to discuss further, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Karen Gibson, the former Director of U.S. Intelligence for the U.S. Central Command, also former senior U.S. diplomat Alan Ayer, who was a member of the team that negotiated the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, and the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Dana Stroll. General, I want to start with you. When you hear Kristen Holmes reporting, you hear the words of the President of the United States, retribution, retaliation. You also hear more assets being sent into the region by the Pentagon. Forgive the question, but does it sound like a clear plan, or does it sound more like an emotional reaction?
Well, I think when we see that there are additional assets going forward, that would lead me to believe that the Central Command commander has requested these as a prudent, perhaps, pre-positioning of assets for what might be more expanded operations in the future. I mean, certainly it's an understandable desire to have retribution for the tragic deaths of American service members, but the number of perhaps refueling aircraft and others that are going forward lead me to believe that perhaps there is planning for a more expansive target set than what we've seen to date, which has largely been focused on eliminating or reducing Iran's military capabilities that can be used to interdict or affect commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz.
And Alan, follow on from there. If you get expanded assets and you get expanded targeting, do you believe that is likely to convince the Iranian leadership, okay, it's time to back down or come back to the table with a more conciliatory approach?
Highly unlikely, John. This Iranian leadership, more radical, more militarized, less risk-averse, and more anti-U.S., is almost certainly not going to capitulate because they see any capitulation as just inviting further pressure from the United States and and Israel. So no, I think what would happen is the Iranians are engaged right now in moving up the escalatory ladder. So to the extent that the United States escalates, it will respond proportionally, perhaps targeting GCC energy infrastructure or other available targets. But the Iranian leadership, they've lost 6,000 Iranians. They've lost over 50 of their top military and civilian leaders, and they're firmly convinced the U.S. and Israel are seeking to get rid of the regime. So they're not really looking for ways to play nice with the United States.
Well, then, Dana, is there any conclusion to make, at least on this day, that this is going to continue to spiral into something bigger, bigger, and bigger still?
Well, first of all, making Iran pay is not a strategic objective, and it's not an achievable military objective. So as what we've seen happen in the past 24 hours is the scope and scale of U.S. strikes inside Iran are expanding. At first, it was just coastal infrastructure, coastal radars, and the specific Iranian military capabilities, as the general said, that were threatening commerce and freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. But now geographically dispersed across Iran, electrical grids, railways, bridges, other infrastructure that could be used for military purposes by Iran and the IRGC, but also are used by civilians. And as the United States expands that aperture, the Iranians, as Alan said, are going to respond in kind. So they are now targeting desalination plants in the Gulf, civilian hotels, and today beyond the U.S. military base in Jordan, actually Jordanian port infrastructure. You take all that together, and this is all signs of an escalating scope of military targeting on both sides.
General Gibson, to help somebody out there who might be confused, you have a unique perspective from your position at CENTCOM. On the one hand, there is no question in 4+ months, the United States has delivered some punishing military blows against Iranian capabilities. And yet, Iran can still, as it had over the weekend, launch missiles into Jordan and strike those bases and sadly kill U.S. servicemen and women. Help that in the context in terms of what Iran has lost, but what it's still capable of doing.
Yes. So I think in terms of the strike against Jordan, the range itself of that weapon was not a surprise. Perhaps the precision and accuracy of the strike, depending on whether the building that they actually struck was the one they intended to, that might be somewhat of a surprise. But even though the U.S. military has conducted punishing airstrikes for months and really significantly degraded much of Iran's inventory, there is still much that remains, and actually eliminating it entirely is a very high bar, particularly for things like one-way attack drones. They're cheap, They're plentiful, they're easy to hide, they're hard to find, there aren't a lot of signatures until they begin to launch one. It reminds me very much of trying to entirely eliminate the IED network in Iraq that was being used against American service members, decades ago. It's just a very asymmetric fight, and it is incredibly difficult to eliminate every one of those weapons. Obviously, as they've demonstrated, they still have and continue to produce inventory.
And Alan, as we have the conversation about the United States and Iran, we see the Houthis deciding to get involved as well, to join the escalation, if you will. It's not directly connected, maybe, but it certainly is connected. What's the impact of that?
Well, the obvious one, John, which is that, again, this is not because Iran asked them to. It's because they've got their own beef with the Saudis. The animosity mutual between those two have acted up in the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, that will not only restrict Saudi's ability to export what it was shipping overland to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, but it will also degrade the Saudis' ability to import vital foods they need for their own population. And one other quick point, John, let's not forget, this war right now is all about reopening or trying to reopen a strait that was fully open before we started the war. The putative cause of this war, the nuclear issue, is so far down the road you can't even see it.
Dana, you heard at the top of the program, the Pentagon now conceding, CNN's reporting that they've been slow to disclose the injuries in the war. That's not how the Pentagon would describe it, but tonight they say 100 or so killed in the last couple of weeks. There hasn't been a Pentagon briefing in, I believe, 2 months. In the middle of injured, forgive me for that, injured here. There hasn't been a Pentagon briefing in 2 months. Does the administration, should it be more transparent, or are they right to say, we can't tell you about these injuries because of security concerns?
I think it's two challenges, and we've seen other Department of Defense teams and other Pentagon teams balance these tensions. So on the one hand, information that's extremely timely allows the enemy, in this case Iran, to learn whether or not their targeting is effective. And if it's not effective, then they're going to learn how to improve over time. So there's always a need to limit exactly what is available in the public domain immediately. At the same time, transparency is part of our system here of rules, congressional oversight, in a democracy where the public has a right to know what its military service members whose lives are at risk every day are doing, what we're achieving, and what this blood and treasure is for. And the lack of transparency, the lack of public articulation is a core vulnerability. And it's why so many Americans and so many members of Congress are questioning exactly what we can realistically achieve in this war.
General Gibson, let me close with you. You heard Kristen Holmes, our White House correspondent, saying, of course, everything is always being considered. But it does seem, with more assets going in and more escalation going in, that the administration, at least at the moment, does not believe, and Alan made this point, that Iran is ready to come back to the table in any conciliatory or any meaningful way. So then, are there new military objectives that might bring that about?
Well, when I think about, as a former intelligence professional, what an adversary is going to do, I look at two things. One, what is their will and intent, their desire? And two, what is their ability? And we've already talked about the effect that we've had, not total, in trying to degrade their ability to conduct strikes. But when we look at their will and intent, their desire, their stated desire to institute a new mechanism for navigation through the straits that they'll control, the fact that they continue to hit shipping despite all of these strikes by U.S. Central Command leads me to believe that we're not affecting their will and intent. And I think continuing along the path of having the same kinds of strikes that we've had in the past, it's going to take something that really is far more significant to change their calculus and cause them to back off on this insistence that they will control vessels that go through the straits. It's a tough nut to crack.
Sure seems to be. General Gibson, Alan Air, Dana Stroll, grateful for your time. Thank you so much.